All right, so get this. A missed payroll at Politico
Yeah.
turns into this whole online brawl about government funding
Oh, wow.
and fake news and Elon Musk.
Uh-huh.
You wouldn't think government subscriptions to news outlets would be that interesting.
Right.
But this deep dive
Yeah.
through CNN, The Washington Post, Yahoo News, and The Wrap
Okay.
shows just how wild things got.
It really is a fascinating case study in just how fast misinformation can spread.
Yeah.
Just in today's world,
Yeah.
a simple payroll issue
Right.
turns into accusations of Politico receiving millions in funding
Oh, wow.
from U.S. side, implying this corrupt backroom deal.
Right.
It's just wild.
And then, of course,
Yeah.
Elon Musk jumps right
into the fray.
tweets about a huge waste of taxpayer money.
Yeah.
It's like he can't help himself.
It's like he just sees a fire and just has to pour gasoline on it.
Exactly.
And then you've got right-wing commentators like Dana Loesch calling for protests outside Politico's offices.
Yeah, it just blew up.
It blew up.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Our sources clearly show that the initial narrative
Yeah.
was completely false.
Totally false.
Politico did not receive millions from USA.
Right.
The actual payments were a tiny fraction of the $8 million figure
Right.
that was being thrown around.
Yeah, so that big scary number everyone was yelling about,
Right.
it wasn't even accurate.
So what was it then?
Well, that $8 million actually represents subscriptions from various government agencies for Politico Pro,
Okay.
their premium service.
Oh, wait.
These agencies use it to stay on top of policy changes,
Okay.
industry trends, and even what's being said about them in the media.
So it's basically like a super detailed newsletter,
Yes.
but specifically for government work.
Exactly. Think about it.
Okay.
If you were in charge of, say, environmental regulations, wouldn't you want to know what's happening in Congress?
Yeah.
What other agencies are doing? What experts in the field are saying?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But isn't it a bit weird
Yeah.
that government agencies are paying for news at all?
Well, not really.
Okay.
Government agencies subscribing to news services is actually very common.
Huh.
It's not unique to Politico.
Oh,
In fact, the Associated Press, Reuters, the New York Times,
Oh.
and even the Washington Post,
Really?
they all receive government subscription payments.
This isn't some kind of special treatment for Politico.
Not at all.
Okay.
The Washington Post article
Yeah.
even points out that 38 House Republicans
Wow.
spent over $300,000 on Politico subscriptions themselves.
Hold on. The same people who are yelling about
Yeah.
government spending on Politico
It's crazy.
are actually paying for it, too.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's just wild.
It really highlights the hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
And remember,
Yeah.
Politico's CEO and editor-in-chief
Right.
denied any government subsidies, stating that their subscriptions,
Yeah.
both government and private,
Right.
are simply payment for valuable journalist services.
Yeah, basically saying, hey, we're just doing our job,
Right.
and people are paying for it.
Okay, so maybe the initial outrage
Yeah.
was a bit misplaced,
Perhaps a little bit.
but it does raise this bigger question.
Yeah.
Should government agencies be allowed to subscribe to news services at all?
Right.
Or is this a waste of taxpayer money?
That's a good question.
That's where things get tricky.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand,
Right.
you could argue that staying informed is crucial
Absolutely.
for government agencies to do their jobs effectively.
They need to know what's going on.
Right. They need to be aware of developments in their field,
Yeah.
understand the potential impact of new policies.
Absolutely.
But then there's the concern about wasteful spending.
Right.
Couldn't they get this information elsewhere for cheaper?
Yeah. That's a valid point.
And what about the risk of bias
Right.
if they're relying on certain news outlets
Yeah.
over others?
Those are all valid concerns.
So there's definitely a balance to strike
Definitely.
between ensuring agencies have the information they need
Yeah.
and being responsible with taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely.
This whole controversy really got me thinking.
Yeah.
What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
Honestly, for me, it's just a reminder of how misinformation can really distort public perception,
Right.
especially when it's amplified by figures like Elon Musk.
Exactly.
We need to be so critical of the information we consume
Uh-huh.
and seek out reliable sources.
Oh, true.
It's so important.
But this story goes even deeper.
It does.
We still need to unpack Politico's recent financial woes
Right.
and their history with the Trump administration. And that's where things get really interesting.
That's where it gets juicy.
So,
The Yahoo News article provides some really crucial details
okay.
about actions taken by the Trump administration
Okay.
and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE,
Oh,
as
yeah.
they're calling it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's catchy.
Yeah, it's catchy, but beyond the name,
Yeah.
this is where things get serious.
Okay.
The White House press secretary announced that Politico would no longer receive any government funding,
Wow.
citing the supposed USAID controversy as justification.
Wait, so they punished Politico for something that wasn't even true?
That appears to be the case.
Wow.
And this decision was heavily influenced by Elon Musk,
Right.
who, let's be honest,
Yeah.
has a history of targeting media outlets
That he disagrees with.
that he disagrees with.
And now he's in charge of DOGE,
Exactly.
which is tasked with slashing the federal budget.
Right.
It seems like he's using this as an opportunity
Yeah.
to silence voices he doesn't like.
It's a concerning possibility for sure.
Yeah.
And it raises some serious questions about censorship and suppressing dissenting voices.
It's getting a little unsettling.
Yeah.
Are we slipping into some kind of Orwellian dystopia here,
Right.
where information is controlled? Anyone who disagrees is silenced.
It's a chilling thought,
Yeah.
and one that we should all be wary of.
A free press is vital
Absolutely.
for a functioning democracy.
It really is.
And any attempt to undermine it
Yeah.
should be met with resistance.
Absolutely. I agree.
But before we get too carried away here,
Okay.
let's take a step back.
Right.
Consider the wider context.
Yeah.
We know the Trump administration hasn't exactly been friendly towards the media,
Right.
and Politico, with its focus on Washington,
Mm-hmm.
has often been in their crosshairs.
They've definitely been a target.
So this move could be part of a larger pattern
Right.
of attempting to discredit,
Yeah.
delegitimize news organizations critical of the administration.
It's a possibility.
And it's not just Politico.
Right.
The CNN article mentions that back in 2019,
Yeah.
the Trump administration pressured agencies to cancel subscriptions to the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Oh, wow.
So this is not an isolated incident.
It seems like there's a concerted effort to control the flow of information and limit access to news sources that offer a different perspective.
Right.
That's dangerous,
Yeah.
no matter your political stance.
Okay, so we have a news organization being punished
Right.
based on a false narrative,
Uh-huh.
driven by politics,
Yeah.
amplified on social media.
It's a mess.
And this is all happening against a backdrop of hostility towards the media
Yeah.
and attempts to control the narrative.
It's a lot.
So where do we go from here?
Well, this is where you, the listener, come in.
Okay.
We've laid out the facts, explored the angles,
Yeah.
highlighted the potential consequences.
Uh-huh.
Now it's up to you to decide what you make of it all.
We're not here to tell you what to think,
Right.
but to give you the tools to form your own informed opinion.
Exactly.
And to help you do that,
Yeah.
we're going to leave you with a thought-provoking question.
Okay, shoot.
If government agencies are barred from subscribing to news services like Politico,
Mm-hmm.
how will they stay informed, especially on sensitive or controversial issues?
Yeah.
What impact could this have on their decisions
Good question.
and their ability to effectively serve the public?
Yeah, that's a big one.
And even more importantly,
Oh.
what happens to democracy
Right.
and the free flow of information
Uh-huh.
if the government can dictate which news sources are acceptable?
It's a slippery slope.
These are heavy questions,
are.
but ones we need to grapple with
We do.
in this complex media landscape.
Absolutely. And remember,
Yeah.
the best way to combat misinformation
Uh-huh.
and protect the integrity of our information ecosystem
Right.
is to stay informed,
Okay.
think critically,
Yeah.
and engage in thoughtful dialogue.
Well said.
Thanks.
We'll pick up right here next time, diving deeper into the potential implications
Okay.
of this whole Politico saga.
Sounds good. It really does kind of make you wonder, like, is this a targeted attack, to
Yeah.
silence Politico, or is this part of, like, a bigger strategy,
Yeah.
to, like, control the flow of information?
Especially when, like you said, Politico isn't the only one getting these government subscriptions.
Exactly.
So why single them out now?
Right.
It all seems a bit fishy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the Yahoo News article really digs into this.
Okay.
The White House press secretary specifically calls out the USAID funding
Uh-huh.
as the reason for canceling Politico's subscriptions.
Right.
But like we already talked about,
Yeah.
that was just a tiny little piece.
Right. A tiny
The
fraction.
total spending.
So they basically used a debunked story
Yeah,
to justify a political move.
it really seems that way.
But like classic misdirection, isn't it?
It kind of is, and it's even more troubling when you think about the bigger picture here.
Okay.
The article points out that, President Trump has repeatedly praised Elon Musk
Right.
and has basically given him free rein to make these sweeping changes.
And remember, Musk has his own history of going after outlets that he doesn't like. He's been very open about his dislike for certain news organizations.
Right?
And now he's in a position to actually do something about it.
Exactly. And that should worry anyone who values a free and independent press.
Yeah, if those in power can just silence voices they don't like,
Right?
I mean, that sets a very dangerous precedent.
It's a slippery slope.
It's like that old saying,
What's that?
power corrupts, power corrupts absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly it feels a lot less like a quote and a lot more like a warning.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So this whole thing kind of forces us to ask some really tough questions
Yeah.
about the government's role in regulating the media.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, what happens when those in power have a personal stake in controlling the narrative?
That's a great question.
Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack here.
We do.
Misinformation campaign, politically driven decisions,
Yeah.
the potential for censorship,
Mm-hmm.
and what all of this means for democracy and a free press.
Right. It's a lot to process.
It is.
And it's also important to acknowledge that,
Yeah.
there are different perspectives on this issue.
Right.
Some people might argue that the government has the right to decide where taxpayer money goes, and that, if they choose not to support a particular news outlet,
Right.
that's their prerogative.
Right. But others might say that, that sets a dangerous precedent.
Mm-hmm.
And it could lead to a situation where the government only backs media
Right.
that agrees with them.
Yeah.
And it effectively silences dissenting voices.
Exactly. And that's the heart of the debate.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line
Right.
between government oversight and freedom of the press?
Exactly.
How do we ensure responsible spending
Uh-huh.
without stepping on First Amendment rights?
These are tough questions.
They are.
And I don't think there are any easy answers.
Not at all.
But it's vital that we have these conversations
Yeah.
and that we understand the potential consequences of these actions.
Yes.
Like, what happens when you start silencing certain voices in the media?
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really important to remember that this isn't just about Politico.
Right.
This is about the principle
Yeah.
of a free and independent press, which is absolutely essential for a functioning democracy.
Exactly.
If the government controls the flow of information,
Right.
we risk becoming a society where only certain perspectives are allowed.
Yeah, that's a very slippery slope.
It is.
One that we definitely don't want to go down.
We do not.
So what are the potential implications of this decision?
Right.
And what can we as informed citizens do
Yeah.
to protect the integrity of our news media?
Those are great questions, and we're going to explore those further in just a second.
Okay.
But first, I think it's helpful to kind of shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and examine the role of government subscriptions in the media landscape.
Yeah.
Because I think this controversy has really kind of shined a light
Yeah.
on how news organizations are funded and the sometimes very complicated relationship between the government and the press.
And all of our sources point out that
Yeah.
Politico isn't some anomaly here.
Right.
Plenty of news organizations get subscription payments
They do.
from government agencies.
Huh?
It's pretty common practice.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, these subscriptions
Yeah.
aren't handouts.
Right.
They're not subsidies or anything like that.
Okay.
They're payments for a service,
Right.
access to specialized information and analysis that helps government agencies do their jobs.
Yeah, it's like subscribing to a trade journal
Exactly.
or an industry newsletter, but for government folks.
Yeah, and these subscriptions can be pretty expensive.
Right.
Especially for something like Politico Pro,
Uh-huh.
which is known for its in-depth coverage, of policy and legislation.
Okay, so this is where things get even more interesting.
All right.
Because while the initial story focused on USA funding,
Right.
the reality is that a wide range of government agencies subscribe to Politico Pro,
Uh-huh.
including many Republican-led committees and offices.
That's right.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So some of the same people who were criticizing Politico
Yeah, I know.
were actually paying for its services.
It's wild, right?
That's crazy.
The Washington Post article specifically states that 38 House Republicans
Wow.
spent over $300,000 on Politico subscriptions last year.
Wow. That's pretty hypocritical, wouldn't you say?
I mean, it definitely seems that way.
It seems like they were totally happy to benefit from Politico's reporting,
Right.
as long as it was happening quietly behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But as soon as it became public,
Uh-huh.
they turned it into a scandal.
Exactly. And it really makes you question their motives.
Right.
Like, were they genuinely concerned about wasteful spending? Or was this just a convenient way to attack a media outlet that they perceived as hostile?
It really makes you think.
It does.
It seems pretty clear that there was more at play here than just fiscal responsibility.
Absolutely.
This whole situation really raises a huge question.
What's that?
How are news organizations funded?
Right.
And what role does the government play in that ecosystem?
That's a key point, because if government agencies are suddenly prohibited from subscribing to news services, it could have a huge ripple effect across the entire media landscape.
Right. Imagine the impact, especially on smaller publications.
Exactly. For some of them, those government subscriptions are a lifeline.
Right.
You know, losing that funding could force them to cut staff, reduce their coverage, maybe even shut down completely.
And that's not good for anyone.
No.
Least of all the public.
Definitely not.
You know, we rely on a free and independent press to hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely.
So while we should definitely scrutinize government spending and make sure that taxpayer money is being used responsibly,
of course,
we also need to think about the unintended consequences.
Right.
You know, cutting off funding to news organizations, especially when it's politically motivated, can stifle free speech
Absolutely.
and undermine the foundations of a democratic society.
Well said. And I think that brings us to the final thought that we want to leave you with today.
Okay.
If government agencies can't subscribe to news services anymore, how are they going to stay informed?
Right.
Will they have to rely solely on official government channels?
Right, which might present a biased or incomplete picture.
Exactly. And what impact will that have on their ability to make good decisions and to effectively serve the public?
These are crucial questions for all of us to think about.
They are.
After all, an informed citizenry is essential for a healthy democracy.
Absolutely.
And access to a diverse and independent media plays a crucial role in that.
It really does.
So we'll be back next time to wrap up our deep dive into this whole Politico controversy.
Right.
And explore these questions even further. Okay, so we're back and ready to kind of wrap up our deep dive into this whole Politico funding controversy. You know, we've talked about the misinformation, the politics, the potential consequences.
Right.
Now, I want to bring it back to you, the listener.
Okay.
How could the cancellation of these government subscriptions to news services like Politico actually impact your life?
That's a great question. And, you know, it might seem like something that only affects people in Washington. But the ripple effects of something like this could be felt way beyond the Beltway.
Right.
Like, think about it.
Okay.
Government agencies rely on information from all sorts of sources to make decisions that affect all of us.
Right. Everything from environmental regulations to healthcare policies to national security.
Exactly.
These decisions are based on information.
Right.
And if that information is limited or biased, well, it could have some pretty serious consequences.
It could.
For everyday people.
Absolutely. And remember, we're not just talking about Politico here. This situation raises these broader questions about government funding for news organizations in general.
Right. Like, what happens if agencies are only allowed to get information from sources that agree with the administration?
Exactly.
That's a pretty scary thought.
It is a little bit Orwellian.
It's like creating this echo chamber.
Right.
Where dissenting voices are silenced. And the public is left with this distorted view of reality.
Exactly. And that's why a free and independent press is so incredibly important. You know, journalists play this vital role in holding those in power accountable.
Right.
And providing the public with the information they need to make good decisions.
So what can we do?
Right.
You know, as informed citizens, how can we protect the integrity of our news media?
Right.
And ensure that we have access to a diversity of viewpoints?
That is the million-dollar question. And honestly, it starts with awareness.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the forces at play, the potential biases, the ways in which information can be manipulated.
Right. And we can't just passively consume information anymore.
We can't.
We need to be active participants.
Absolutely.
In the process. Asking questions, challenging assumptions, seeking out a variety of sources.
Exactly. Don't just take things at face value.
Right.
Dig a little deeper, consider different perspectives, engage in thoughtful dialogue. That's how we combat misinformation.
Right.
And make sure that we're making decisions based on facts, not fiction.
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day drama of politics.
It is.
But it's important to remember that these issues have real-world implications.
Yeah.
For all of us.
They do.
The Politico controversy is just one example of the challenges we face.
Right.
In a world where information is increasingly weaponized.
Absolutely. It's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Urging us to be more critical consumers of information and more vocal advocates for a free and independent press.
I couldn't agree more. We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and empowered you to navigate this complex information landscape.
Right.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
For another insightful exploration of the news and issues that matter most.
Sounds good.